So good morning. Good morning. How many of you are returning from study abroad? So you haven't been here in quite a while, and you've missed our orientations, right? And how many of you stayed around here because you're international students and you were on campus the entire time? Oh, that's good. So you had a chance to get away from campus. All right, well, I'm Joanne Murray. I am the director of the Albright Institute, and I am joined this morning by our faculty director, Professor Joseph Joyce in the economics department, and Annie Doyeski-Santos, our associate director, is in the back. Many of you have gotten to know Annie. And Julie is somewhere organizing what's coming up next, probably, Julie Lanza. So for those of you who've attended the orientations, you've gotten to meet us all, but for many of you, it seems like this is your first time back. And what we know from students studying abroad is that it's often much more difficult to come back than it is to go away. So people are always worried about culture shock when you leave, but it's reverse culture shock coming back. So we're prepared to welcome you. And now, hopefully, we have tested enough that I can get started. What do you think? All right, great. I want to say a couple of little technical words here, which is that we will be wearing lavalier mics, and that is because we put the lectures up on our web pages. So you will be asked to be incredibly efficient with the 2 microphones that you will pass around the room, all right? Because we are going to project your questions. I can tell you from experience that the most interesting part of the conversations or the lectures begin when you start having the questions for our faculty lecturers, okay? So please be mindful that you will have a microphone that will not amplify, but you need to make sure it's on, and then say your name and project and ask your question, and then quickly get the microphone to the next person so that we can take complete and full advantage. All right, so why don't we begin, before I start, I'm going to ask you to please stand and introduce yourself and say your major and where you've been over the holiday very quickly, and we'll do a quick whip around because this is really our first time of being in the room together. And so we will start here, and I don't see your name tag, so put your name tag on and then stand up and say who you are.
It's outside, I'll grab it.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so hi, I'm Shan, and I was in Singapore.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Shan.
Hi, my name is Mew, and I was in Cancun, Mexico over the holiday.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I was in Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I was in the Czech Republic and Austria.
Wow.
Hi, my name is Alice. I was in Michigan.
Hi, my name is Amy. I was also in Cancun.
Wow.
Hi, my name is Kat. I was in Vermont.
Hi, my name is Seraphine. I was at home in Sugar Land, Texas.
Hi, my name is Karine, and I was in Boston.
Hi, my name is Amal, and I was in Israel. My name is Kim, and I was in Seattle.
My name is Simone. I was in New York.
Hi, my name is Claudia. I was in Ghana.
Hi, my name is Ilhan. I was in Boston.
Hi, my name is Savitri. I was home in Colombia.
Hi, I'm Layla. I was in Egypt.
Great.
Hello, my name is Lucy. I was in LA.
Thank you, Lucy. Let's jump over here.
Hi, my name is Tanai. I was in Italy.
Hi, my name is Olivia, and I was in Massachusetts.
I'm Tessa, and I was in Pittsburgh, PA.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jelena, and I was home in California.
Hi, I'm Sierra. I was in Idaho.
Hi, I'm Vivian, and I was in Michigan.
I'm Isabel, and I was in Massachusetts.
I'm Mackenzie. I was in Missouri.
Hi, I'm Brianne. I was in Ireland.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I was home in Littleton, Colorado.
Hi, I'm Lillian. I was home in Hong Kong.
Hi, I'm Callie. I was in Oklahoma with it.
Hello, I'm Sophie. I was home in Boulder, Colorado.
Hi, I'm Liz, and I was in North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Gloria, and I was in Los Angeles.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I was in Amsterdam.
I'm Sanam and I was in New Hampshire.
Hi, I'm Bhavna and I was home in Saratoga, California.
Hi, I'm Kathleen. I was in Chicago.
Hi, I'm Claudia. I was home in New York.
Hi, I'm Rose. I was home in Portland, Oregon.
So it is with tremendous happiness that I welcome you this morning to the Madeleine, Korbel, Albright Institute for Global Affairs. Based on Wellesley's extraordinary presence and leadership in the world and honoring the country's first woman Secretary of State, the Madeleine Korbel Albright Institute for Global Affairs is built on Wellesley's commitment to service in and to the world. It is just this, being of service to the world, that lies at the core of our educational mission, and Wellesley's legacy of leadership is pervasive, and this mandate of service is inseparable from the Albright Institute. So you will hear about that as a core tenet of the Institute throughout this month. You are our 7th class of fellows, and we have selected you very particularly. You are equal numbers of juniors and seniors. You represent, of the 40, 29 different majors. So there's tremendous diversity. Over our 7 years, we've had 54 majors represented here at the Albright Institute. So we have in the room American Studies and Art History major. We have Classical Civilization and Computer Science. We have Mathematics, Middle Eastern Studies, and Political Science, Psychology, Sociology, and Spanish. While we have slightly fewer international students this year, we have 13 countries represented here in terms of citizenships. We have Brazil, Colombia, Egypt, Germany, Ghana, Ireland, Japan, Nigeria, Singapore, South Korea, United Kingdom, Vietnam, and of course the United States. You will learn as much from each other as you will from the best faculty presenter, the best policy maker, because we have designed this institute as a living, learning laboratory. So for those of you who've been enjoying single rooms, you know you're in a double, and you know you're all in Freeman or one of the surrounding dorms together, where you can have ample time to be with each other in the late afternoons and evenings for your group work and for your time together. So we will expect you to extend Wellesley's legacy of leadership and service, both here at home in your time after the Institute and in the larger interdependent global community. The Albright Institute takes as its perspective a liberal arts approach to seek to understand and address global issues. In that sense, it's distinctive from other global issues institutes. It is our belief that colleges and universities have a mandate, a global mandate, to produce the future leaders who will embrace responsibility for addressing the issues facing our world. Historian W.R. Connor writes about the etymology of the word liberal in liberal education, deriving from the Greek word free. Liberally educated individuals can research a topic, develop a reasoned argument, analyze counter-arguments, and assess merits of specific proposals. They can clearly articulate their views. Liberal education was designed to impart the knowledge necessary to be effective in the public sphere, making decisions at important meetings. It was constructed as a public good in order to help society progress. But it was more than that. It was designed to be the education that was necessary to ensure wise decisions. And we're going to be talking about the difference between knowledge and wisdom throughout this month. Liberal arts is critical to be able to assess the reliability of received knowledge, to determine what further knowledge is needed, and to critically evaluate competing arguments, assessing merits of different proposals, and then articulating views to ultimately make wise decisions. That will be our focus this January. In a Carnegie-funded study entitled The Formation of Scholars, George Walker found a hallmark of true intellectual communities to be knowledge-centered but relationship-based. Knowledge-centered but relationship-based. This is another central tenet of the Albright Institute. Intellectual communities share ideas across disciplinary boundaries, but they're more than that. They're diverse, they're respectful, they genuinely cherish unfettered discussion, and most importantly, their members welcome the discovery of a point of view different from their own. They see disagreement as an opportunity for engagement and a chance to broaden their own perspectives and sharpen their own focus. True intellectual communities allow for risk and failure and encourage visionary thinking, asking hard questions, pushing frontiers, solving problems. This is the way the Albright Institute has been structured from its beginning, and it is our challenge to you as fellows to approach your learning. So these are some scary words here. Risk-taking. We don't do that a lot at Wellesley. I'll talk more about that later on. John Dewey, an American psychologist, philosopher, and educator, whose ideas have been very influential to both education and social reform, claimed, "Interest in learning from all contexts in life is the essential moral interest." At the conclusion of his book, Democracy in Education, written in 1916, Dewey made this simple yet radical claim: openness to the world is the foundation of all education. Albright faculty are among our most accomplished philosophers, theologians, scientists, and political scientists. Representing the disciplines that define the liberal arts, these faculty serve as the stewards of their disciplines and professions. They will engage you in the month ahead in a discovery and an analysis of global issues from their areas of research expertise. Further, they will encourage the kind of thinking that is required in order to understand the complexities of both the world's beauties and problems. This institute is not about current events, but rather the chronic problems that vex our world. Your groups address that: hunger, health and well-being, education and access to education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, industry, innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, and climate action. It is not about current events. However, the events of 2015 can provide a lens through which we can examine current crises as a way to understand the root causes of these chronic issues. In 2015, we witnessed growing inequality in advanced economies, protracted financial crises in Europe, a stabilizing financial situation in the US, the first since 2008. However, slower growth in China's economy and a slowing in India's growth. Last year, in 2015, in the middle of our Winter Session Institute, Charlie Hebdo attacks occurred. Since then, whether ISIS-led, Al-Qaeda-led, self-radicalized, or homegrown, we have seen attacks proliferate around the globe. The civil war in Syria that has resulted in the deaths of at least 250,000 lives has continued to escalate and half the country's population has fled their homes. As a result, an escalating refugee crisis has emerged, and 4.4 million Syrian refugees have were registered by the UN High Commission for Refugees. Data breaches are now so common in every industry and sector, proving to be a burgeoning issue worldwide. And just in the last few days, we see the unfolding events between Sunnis and Shias that have produced increasing instability in the Middle East. At the same time, in 2015, there were remarkable acts of progress and collaboration. We saw the control of the Ebola epidemic. Liberia was declared free of Ebola in May, and there are only a small number of cases remaining. We learned a great deal about how to contain such an epidemic in 2015. Through skill, patience, and tenacity, negotiators built enough of a base to arrive at a historic agreement with Iran on the nuclear deal. The first global pact to confront climate change was signed in Paris just a few weeks ago, with 195 nations agreeing to reduce greenhouse emissions. At the same time, China issued its first red alert, and we were reminded that most of the islands in the South Pacific have less than 6 feet, are less than 6 feet above sea level. In 2015, we saw the end to, or the beginning of relations with the US and China, something that thawed since 1962. And in 2015, we saw the end of the one-child policy in China after a generation, though the demographic engineering continues on the part of the government, as individuals are now limited to 2 children. After 25 years of house arrest, Myanmar held its first open, contested elections and overwhelmingly elected Aung San Suu Kyi. She and her party, the NLD, are slowly shaping a transition for that country. I list these events because they serve as a backdrop and a context as you take up your global issues. This morning, you will hear from the Deputy CEO of the United Nations Foundation, Elizabeth Cousins. Before joining the UN Foundation a year ago, Elizabeth Cousins served as the U.S. Ambassador to the UN Economic and Social Council and alternative representative to the UN General Assembly. Cousins served as our visiting distinguished professor last year. She was formidable and accessible at the same time, and we are deeply honored that she's come back to open the Albright Institute this year. As you begin to consider your topics, listen for Ambassador Cousins' descriptions of the process that led to determining these goals, which it is still undetermined how we will measure success in the goals. It is still to be determined how we will finance these goals. In many ways, they are a counter-reaction to the MDGs that we took up at the beginning of the Albright Institute in 2010. They were critiqued as being oriented towards developing countries funded by advanced countries. They were critiqued as not being consensus-driven or collaborative. And these perhaps are an overreaction in a whole new and different way and have a whole different set of unintended consequences. So jump right in this morning when you hear from Ambassador Cousins, because she will share with you her experience. Later today, you're going to be exposed to a key tenet of the Albright Institute, and that is, it is one thing to think about something, it's another to do it, and to do it collectively, okay? So you will hear from Engineering Professor Amy Banzart as we go over to the Science Center, and you will engage in a group activity where she will reinforce for you a core engineering concept, and that is fail fast, succeed sooner. So again, risk-taking is something that will be integrated throughout the Institute. Tomorrow, the Institute's faculty director will introduce you to a central focus of inquiry for this month, and that is inequality. In his lecture, Global Inequality, Trends, Causes, Impact, and Solutions, Professor Joyce will set the stage for the month. We will culminate this month with a public symposium with Secretary Albright, Madame Christine Lagarde of the IMF, the second in charge as Managing Director at the World Bank, Sri Mulani Indrawati, and the lead in developing the MDGs at the UN, Mark Malloch Brown, former Deputy Secretary and Chief of Staff at the United Nations. From there, we will dive into the cornerstone of the Institute, and that is the power of the liberal arts, frameworks and paradigms through which the world can be understood. First, with Larry Rosenwald's exploration and examination of the power of imaginary literature and global affairs, Professor Rosenwald will challenge us to consider the power of imagination, of literature as freedom versus the compelling power of propaganda. Professor of Middle Eastern Studies Rashid Adnani will discuss how Algeria can help us begin to understand the events of the so-called Arab Spring. When this institute began, it was 1 month after Mohamed Bouazizi set himself aflame in Tunisia in December. Professor Adnani will help contextualize these movements that have unfolded in the last 7 years or so. Stacy Goddard will discuss global security in an age of revisionism. Professor Radhakrishnan will expose us to the work of Kiva as a case study to address poverty. And we will then be joined by alumna Anna Ravenga, who is the Senior Director of Poverty and Equity Global Practice at the World Bank Group. She will talk about the role of gender and poverty. And it was 90 economists who report to her that allowed her to co-direct the 2012 World Development Report on Gender, Equality, and Development. She will also discuss her perspective on the SDGs, because it is different from what you might expect from someone working at the World Bank. I had announced at the second orientation that we will be able to talk about the current refugee crisis from the perspective of the Director of Emergency Preparedness at the International Rescue Committee, Bob Kitchen. He will dive deeper into that issue for you. And then we will look at the lived realities of refugees when Sarah Dryden Peterson comes to talk about the daunting task of educating refugee children. This year we'll take up science in a new way, and we'll look at science diplomacy, how that plays out at the State Department, and how structural shifts in funding encourage scientific international collaboration. Our own Professor Dick French, who's part of the Cassini mission to Mars, or to Saturn, will discuss the increasingly vital role of science in global affairs as he talks about cooperation, collaboration, and all too commonly, competition. In the afternoon, he'll be joined by 3 alumni working at the National Science Foundation who will discuss the intersection of scientific research and policy. From Rear Admiral Margaret Kibbins, the Chief of Navy Chaplains, we will explore leading ethically, living morally, something about which she knows a great deal firsthand. And we will hear from a friend of Secretary Albright, Michelle Howard. Michelle is the highest ranked female officer in the Navy. She was the first American to achieve 3-star rank and the rank of admiral in the Navy, and she was the first African American to command a Navy ship. She is here because of her deep friendship with Secretary Albright. We're going to then explore business and whether it is part of the solution or part of the problem, or both, as we have the EVP and President of Global Healthcare for Ecolab, and as we have a leading businesswoman who runs ball bearings, a major ball bearings plant in India, both alumni. Now you're going to notice on your syllabus that there is a somewhat vague entry, and that is because we will have 2 women this year who work for the CIA. One is a Wellesley alumna, and one made the mistake of going to Smith, but we will forgive her. The Wellesley alumna works at the highest strategic level. She was recruited directly by the director of the CIA. She is the individual who is responsible for informing the President of the United States about what actions are recommended at times of crises. And the other agent works more on developing scientific approaches to addressing issues within the CIA. At a time when there are questions about whether or not the mission of the CIA has shifted from espionage and intelligence to becoming a force for covert action, we will be able to inquire about how this powerful institution makes decisions. Logically, none of you have signed up for lunch or tea with these women because it wasn't clear who they were. But if you are interested in knowing more and having more of an intimate conversation about the inner workings of the CIA, you can rush to sign up for that time with them now that it's clear to you. Now, this is just a subset of the topics that we're going to talk about. I could fill my entire hour with them, but I wanted to give you a sense of the degree to which Professor Joyce and I, in close consultation with Secretary Albright, have tried to identify both a cadre of women leaders and leaders at the edge of the topics that are most important now that link to the chronic conditions that you will be examining. So I want to talk about that because though they are the towering architects of our time, and though we will have some of the major power structures that determine key decisions, we do so not blindly, and we do so not as an endorsement. We do so in the spirit of how we define the liberal arts. Remember what I said about John Dewey? Open inquiry, seeking to understand the individuals and the power structures, not necessarily endorse them. We want to understand their histories, their foundations, critical junctures, how they have created change, and how they've changed themselves. The SDGs have many critics. Professor Joyce will share with you some concerns of eminent economists who question the proliferation of the goals. And here again, to restate, the Institute exposes you to both power structures, large and emerging, and historic, in order for you to study them for what they are, in a spirit of open inquiry. You'll learn from your group interaction and eventually from your internships across the globe. And you'll learn from powerful alumni presenters. I want to take a moment with you to talk about what opportunities you have here. I've mentioned to some of you earlier that I've been particularly guided by the work of a woman named Billie Avery. She was the founded the National Black Women's Health Movement in the United States. And Avery was part of an inauguration of a Wellesley College president. And she talked to us here at the college about the importance of not moving to judgment and criticism, but moving to listening and wondering and inquiring. And her admonishment is a guiding force for this institute. It's a very simple recommendation. Take every lesson you can from a woman's life. Take every lesson you can from a woman's life. What differentiates the Albright Institute from many others is that not only will you have these enormously influential expert women coming here, but they are going to talk to you about their lives. They're going to talk to you because they remember when they were sitting in these chairs, and they remember and want to pass along to you the paths that they have taken. So I encourage you to take every lesson you can from each woman's life. And I say that in the generic. There will be men who will be here, and I want you to take lessons from them. You have the incredible generosity of Professor Joyce, who will have dinner with you next week and basically sit down and say, what do you want to know? We've scheduled this year a session with Julie Lanza and Dostoevsky Santos and myself to say, ask me what you want to know. We're all three very private women, so we'll see how that works out. But we're going to give it our best. Those of you who are part of the Anchor Point program know that we tested this out with people who are remarkably open, who are the funders for that program. But we're going to give it a try. But I want to encourage you to think about new ways of approaching your time here, because this institute is about collective action over individual achievement. I'm going to say that again because it's a big one. Okay, collective action over individual achievement. So if you don't even know what that means, or if you're thinking back to Girl Scouts when you were doing things in groups, it's fine not to have a sense of that right now. We're here for you. You're going to hear from Professor Joyce in just a few minutes about your group work and how to approach it. But I do want to talk to you about an ethic of accountability and responsibility that is an expectation. And some of these are very administrative, and some of these are, I hope, very challenging. The first is, I want you to be on time. We're going to start on time. I know that is not the Wellesley way. It'll even be a struggle for us to be in here and start on time, but we're going to start on time. The door's going to close. Get here early, sign in, do what your business is to need to be here, but people have traveled literally continents to come and talk with you. We're going to start on time. So don't walk in late. Okay, I want you to be prepared. We've asked the presenters to only send short writings and readings to you, all right? So I'd really like you to read them, because you're going to be called on. There's a reason your first name is bigger than your last name, and that is so even old folks like me can see Savitri's name all the way in the back. And any of you who've studied with Professor Joyce know that he cold calls. So there's going to be cold calling, and it doesn't mean there's going to be a test, but it does mean come prepared. And by that, what I want to ask you to do is to push yourself out of your comfort zone. This is an ungraded institute for a reason. We could easily have this be a full credit course and more. It's ungraded for a reason, because we want you to push yourself out of your comfort zone. We want you to take a risk. If you are a person who always has her hand up first and always has an idea, I want you to sit on your hand. And if you are a person who at the end of a session says, you know, I knew that and I just couldn't speak up, and I really wish I had, now's the time. Okay? So to some extent, do the opposite of what you've done. Because just as you are well-shaped and formed as scholars, we plan to do a little bit more with that during your time here. So I want you to push yourself out of your comfort zone. I want you to set some personal goals. You don't have to tell anybody what they are, but in your own mind, I want you to think and be very bold. Okay? I want you to be bold. I want you to say, what was I really wanting when I came to Wellesley? What was I really hoping for? What was I really hoping for when I applied to the Albright Institute? Because I can tell you, the gauge that Professor Joyce and I use and the faculty committee uses is if you're here to build your resume, you're gonna not have a good experience. Because it is not about the extrinsic value of this institute, though there is quite a bit of extrinsic value. It is about the intrinsic experience. So think about this. Reconnect to the part of you that's either shut down or gotten formulaic or says, I'm a senior, I know how to do this. And set some personal goals. Take some risks. Allow yourself to be confused. Allow yourself to take on the perspective of the other. And most importantly, focus on the questions and learning how to ask the right questions and not on the answers. Steve Marini, in his very first lecture at the Albright Institute, he's a professor of religion, commented that students would spend the rest of their lives trying to find the answers to the questions. The purpose of this institute is to try to identify the right questions to ask. That's a tall enough order for a 3-week intensive. And last, and this is really a shift, I want you to focus on critical inquiry rather than critical judgment or criticism. I'd much rather have you say at the end of someone's lecture, especially someone's lecture about which you may strongly disagree, I wonder why she sees it that way, than, boy, she really got that wrong, or she missed the boat on this or on that. Because one shuts down a conversation and the other opens it up to trying to ask the question, I wonder how this person formed this opinion or sees that in that particular way. In some way that it could appear to be rude, and I don't mean it that way, you consider that you might be wrong in your beliefs. I want to end with a quote, some advice from Secretary Albright herself. She said, by definition, learning means exploring areas of life and opinions with which you are not already familiar. Instead of choosing to read or listen only to the people whose views make you the most comfortable, choose instead to study those who make you the most upset. Instead of surrounding yourself with friends whose experiences are similar to yours, reach out to classmates whose life stories are unknown. Instead of repeating over and over again the opinions you've expressed in the past, stop venting for a month. Ask yourself why you believe as you do, and submit your own conceptions of truth to the rigorous standards of critical thinking. Above all, I ask you to understand that there's an enormous difference between entering into an argument for the purpose of winning and engaging in research and discussion for the purpose of stretching your mind and giving free rein to your conscience. I ask you to consider that this institute is as much about the power of her example and the examples of others who will be at the front of this room. It's as much about imagination and lack of imagination, and it's as much about human dignity as it is any particular scientific approach. As we begin to explore this walk together over the next month. So welcome. I look forward to seeing how you will change the Albright Institute with your work and your study here.